some DC characters didn't just fade away, they were buried. Lawsuits, backlash, and scandal forced the company to erase them from history. A hero accused of being a stolen copy, dragged into years of legal battles. A villain banned after public outrage branded him offensive, and a Golden Age icon erased when a copyright war threatened DC's empire. These weren't forgettable side characters, they were casualties of lawsuits, bans, and scandals. So which DC creations proved too controversial and were buried before fans could even save them? Here are 10 DC characters that proved too scandalous for DC, buried by lawsuits, bans, and backlash. At number 10 is Wonder Woman, the symbol of strength and independence, who became one of the most scrutinized heroes in comic history. In 1942, a Catholic Decency Commission removed her stories from its approved youth reading list, declaring that she was not sufficiently dressed for young audiences. Her adventures, often featuring imagery that challenged conventional ideas of femininity, were placed on blacklists and questioned by moral authorities. In the 1950s, the spotlight grew even harsher when critics suggested her comics carried undertones that were inappropriate for children, themes they claimed undermined traditional roles for women. These accusations, alongside the strict rules of the Comics Code Authority, forced DC to reshape her character. Over time, her stories shifted focus, emphasizing romance and even stripping her of powers in the late 1960s. Key elements of her earliest identity were effectively banned, leaving Wonder Woman constrained by censorship that sought to control how she represented female power. At number 9 is Extraño, who entered DC history in 1988 as part of the New Guardians. He was presented as the company's first openly gay superhero, but the way he was written drew more controversy than celebration. His appearance was defined by flamboyant clothing, exaggerated mannerisms, and dialogue that leaned into stereotypes of the time. Even his own chosen nickname, Auntie, reflected the caricature that writers created rather than a nuanced portrayal. Not long after his introduction, the storylines placed him in plots tied to the era's most sensitive fears, portraying him as infected with HIV after surviving an encounter with a villain who carried a virus resembling AIDS. These choices drew sharp criticism and quickly made the character a symbol of how poorly certain subjects were handled in comics of the period. After 1989, Extraño disappeared from DC publications. For nearly 30 years, he was absent, essentially banned from stories until a careful reintroduction decades later in a much different form. At number 8 is Chop Chop, the Chinese member of the Black Hawk Squadron who first appeared during the 1940s era. In his earliest years, he was not portrayed as an equal hero, but rather as a caricature of the time, with exaggerated features, broken speech, and the role of comic relief. While his teammates carried the image of brave aviators, Chop Chop was reduced to stereotypes that reflected the prejudices of that generation. As society began to change, those portrayals could no longer continue without backlash, and DC faced growing pressure to remove such offensive depictions from their pages. By the 1950s and 1960s, artists tried to tone him down, and in 1967, he was fully reimagined as a skilled martial artist named Doctor. Hands stripped of the insulting traits that had defined him before. Later, he was given the name Wu Cheng and placed on equal footing with the team. The original version was effectively banned because it represented outdated racial stereotypes that DC could not allow to continue. At number 7 are the Watchmen characters. They were kept under strict control by DC Comics for more than 2 decades. When the series was first published in 1986, DC signed a contract that stated the rights would return to Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons if the book ever went out of print. To prevent this, DC kept Watchmen permanently available and blocked all new stories using Rorschach, Doctor, Manhattan, and the others. From 1986 until 2011, the characters did not appear in sequels, spin-offs, or crossovers, and remained locked inside their original story. The restrictions ended because DC recognized the commercial value of the characters and chose to expand them despite creator objections. In 2012, the company produced Before Watchmen, a series of prequels. By 2017, Doomsday Clock merged the Watchmen with the wider DC universe, placing them alongside Superman and Batman for the first time. For nearly 3 decades, the Watchmen were held in reserve, effectively sidelined by legal and editorial discretion, until DC chose to return to the property. At number 6 is Catwoman, one of Gotham's most enduring figures. who found herself silenced by censorship for more than a decade. After the introduction of the Comics Code Authority in 1954, strict rules were placed on the portrayal of crime and mature themes in comics. Female characters who blurred the line between morality and temptation were singled out, and Catwoman fell directly under that spotlight. Her allure, her independence, and her morally ambiguous nature were deemed inappropriate, and by late 1954, she was gone from Batman's pages entirely. For 12 long years, there was no trace of Selina Kyle in the stories of Gotham, as though she had been erased by decree. It was only in 1966, with the surge of popularity from the Batman television series, that Catwoman was cautiously brought back, reshaped to fit the code's demands. But for over a decade, she disappeared from DC's pages, not by official ban, but by omission, becoming a casualty of societal and editorial constraints on female representation. At number 5 are Static and the Milestone Heroes, a powerful lineup of characters who were created to bring more diversity and representation in comics. In the early 1990s, Milestone launched with heroes like Static, Icon, and Hardware, and their stories quickly stood out for giving voice to perspectives rarely seen in mainstream superhero books. But after the imprint's first run ended in 1997, those heroes suddenly went silent. Complex ownership agreements and royalty disputes meant DC could not freely use them, leaving characters who had once been celebrated on the page and even on television stuck in limbo. Static Shock, despite having a hit animated series, went without a proper comic for more than a decade. Efforts to revive or integrate the Milestone line stalled, blocked by legal roadblocks and unresolved contracts. For years, these heroes remained absent due to licensing and legal constraints, until the launch of Milestone Returns in late 2020 through early 2021, which finally brought them back in print and digital formats. At number 4 is Egg Fu, a Wonder Woman villain introduced in 1965. He was depicted as a giant egg with a caricatured face, a long mustache, and dialogue written in broken English. Editors identified the portrayal as a racial stereotype and removed the character from ongoing publication after his initial appearances. For decades, the original depiction did not return in new issues, reprints, or crossovers. When DC later revisited the concept, the character was substantially reworked and entirely renamed Chong Tsu, with the exaggerated traits eliminated. Subsequent uses retained the egg-shaped adversary idea while avoiding the earlier language and visual tropes. Modern comics also separated the reimagined figure from the wartime context that framed the first version. As a result, the early portrayal was effectively discontinued under editorial policy. Only the altered interpretation appears in later continuity, and references to the 1960s design are limited to historical context. The original Egg Fu has never been restored to canon since the period that introduced him. At number 3 is Superboy. In the mid-2000s, DC Comics faced a legal battle with the estate of Superman's creators, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, over the ownership of the Superboy name. Because the rights to the character were tied up in dispute, DC pulled back the use of the name across its books, leaving the hero in legal limbo. This decision didn't just affect branding, it shaped entire stories. Connor Kent, the modern teen Superboy and a member of the Teen Titans, was killed off in 2006's Infinite Crisis, right in the middle of this standoff. At the same time, another version, Superboy Prime, was often referred to as Superman Prime, a deliberate move to sidestep the restricted name. For several years, the Superboy title itself disappeared, and the character's presence in the DC universe was drastically reduced. Only after the lawsuit reached resolution in the late 2000s did DC restore the character, with Connor Kent reclaiming the Superboy mantle in Adventure Comics, 2009. At number 2 is the Black Bomber, a character concept created during the 1970s that never made it to publication. The idea centered on a white racist who, when placed under stress, would transform into a black superhero, neither version aware of the other's identity. Drafted scripts even described him in a gaudy, basketball-style uniform and portrayed him with racially insensitive behavior, reflecting the worst stereotypes of the time. 2 full scripts were completed, but before they could be published, writer Tony Isabella reviewed the material and strongly opposed it. He argued that making a character like this, the company's first black superhero, would be unacceptable. His objection led DC editorial to cancel the project completely in 1977. Instead, Black Lightning was introduced as a hero who represented strength and dignity without caricature, aside from a tongue-in-cheek parody cameo years later. The Black Bomber never appeared in any official storyline. He was wholly rejected by DC before a single issue ever reached the shelves. At number 1 is Captain Marvel, the boy hero Billy Batson, who once rivaled Superman in popularity before vanishing for decades. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, DC Comics filed a lawsuit against Fawcett Publications, arguing that Captain Marvel was too similar to Superman. The case dragged on until 1953, when Fawcett agreed to stop publishing the character entirely, bringing all of Billy Batson's adventures to a sudden halt. What had been one of the best-selling superheroes of the Golden Age was suddenly gone, erased not by a villain, but by the weight of legal action. For nearly 20 years, Captain Marvel did not appear in any new stories, leaving fans without the magical words of Shazam. In the 1970s, DC licensed the character and brought him back, though now forced to use the title Shazam because Marvel Comics had trademarked the original name. The long absence remains one of the most significant bans in comic book history, silencing a hero for an entire generation. Which story shocked you most? Let us know, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more hidden comic history.